The first scream echoed across the marble halls of the Hawthorne mansion at exactly 2:17 a.m. Every security monitor suddenly turned black. Every alarm stopped. Every guard froze. When billionaire Richard Hawthorne reached the second floor, Richard Hawthorne found the nursery door wide open. The crib was empty. 20-month-old Ethan Hawthorne, the only son and sole heir to a fortune worth billions, had vanished without leaving a single footprint. The window remained locked from the inside. The door showed no damage. Every camera recording from the previous 30 minutes had disappeared. Police officers searched every room. FBI agents searched every acre surrounding the estate. Helicopters scanned forests for weeks. Divers searched nearby lakes. Nothing, not a single clue. The disappearance became America's greatest unsolved mystery. 20 years later, the truth would shake the entire nation. 20 years earlier, Richard Hawthorne stood before hundreds of reporters outside Hawthorne Technologies headquarters. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Every microphone pointed toward Richard Hawthorne. "My son is alive," Richard Hawthorne said with unwavering confidence. Richard Hawthorne will never stop searching. Millions of Americans believed every word. Nobody noticed the quiet tears running down Emily Hawthorne's face. Emily Hawthorne, Ethan's mother, looked toward the mansion instead of the cameras. Emily Hawthorne carried a secret, not the truth about Ethan's disappearance. A different secret, one capable of destroying the Hawthorne family forever. Inside the mansion, every room displayed photographs of little Ethan, birthday pictures, first steps, first smile. Every hallway reminded Richard Hawthorne of everything Richard Hawthorne had lost. Every morning began inside the nursery. Richard Hawthorne sat beside the empty crib for exactly 10 minutes. Every night ended the same way. Hope slowly became obsession. The investigation grew larger every month. Former detectives, private investigators, military tracking specialists, psychologists. No expense mattered. Richard Hawthorne spent more than $200 million searching for Ethan. Every lead ended in disappointment. Every phone call brought false hope. Every anonymous letter demanded money. Every claimed sighting collapsed under investigation. Years passed. Emily Hawthorne stopped speaking to reporters. Richard Hawthorne worked longer hours. Success filled business headlines. Loneliness filled the mansion. The world admired Richard Hawthorne as a determined father. Nobody saw the growing distance inside the marriage. One rainy evening, retired Detective Samuel Brooks knocked on the mansion door. Samuel Brooks had led the original investigation 20 years earlier. Age covered Samuel Brooks with gray hair, but determination still burned inside Samuel Brooks' eyes. "I found something," Samuel Brooks quietly said. Richard Hawthorne immediately invited Samuel Brooks inside. Samuel Brooks placed a faded notebook on the table. This notebook disappeared from the evidence room 18 years ago. Richard Hawthorne opened the notebook with trembling hands. Every page contained handwritten notes, dates, names, phone numbers, small observations ignored during the investigation. One sentence had been circled in red. "Follow the gardener." Richard Hawthorne looked confused. "The gardener died years ago," Richard Hawthorne said. Samuel Brooks slowly nodded. "Official records say exactly that." Silence filled the room. Samuel Brooks leaned closer. "I visited the cemetery yesterday." Richard Hawthorne waited. "The grave is empty." Richard Hawthorne stared without blinking. "What?" Samuel Brooks repeated every word carefully. "The coffin contained stones." A cold silence settled across the room. Richard Hawthorne suddenly realized the investigation might have started with a lie. The next morning, Richard Hawthorne and Samuel Brooks drove to a forgotten farming village almost 300 miles away. The address came from the notebook. An abandoned greenhouse stood beside an old wooden house. Nature had almost swallowed both buildings. Samuel Brooks forced a rusty door open. Dust floated through the sunlight. Broken flower pots covered the floor. Nothing looked unusual until Richard Hawthorne noticed children's drawings hidden behind a loose wooden wall. Samuel Brooks carefully removed the board. Dozens of drawings fell onto the floor. Every drawing showed the same little boy, the same blue eyes, the same birthmark beneath the left ear. Ethan. Each drawing carried a different date. The final drawing had been created almost 15 years after Ethan disappeared. Richard Hawthorne's heartbeat raced. Someone kept watching Ethan, Richard Hawthorne whispered. Samuel Brooks found another object buried beneath the drawings, a small cassette tape. Fortunately, Samuel Brooks still carried an old portable tape player inside the car. The tape crackled. A frightened male voice finally emerged. If anybody finds this recording, never trust. Static interrupted the sentence. Several seconds passed. The voice returned. Richard Hawthorne knows. Static swallowed the remaining words. The tape ended. Richard Hawthorne sat frozen. Samuel Brooks looked equally shocked. Neither man spoke for several moments. Richard Hawthorne finally broke the silence. Richard Hawthorne knows what? Samuel Brooks slowly looked toward the abandoned house. For 20 years, somebody wanted the world to believe Ethan disappeared. A fresh breeze pushed the front door open. Both men turned. Fresh, muddy footprints stretched across the dusty floor. Somebody had entered the greenhouse only minutes earlier. The footprints continued toward the forest. Samuel Brooks reached for a flashlight. Richard Hawthorne followed without hesitation. Neither man realized somebody hidden among the trees quietly watched every step. The unseen figure smiled. Because the search for Ethan Hawthorne had finally begun exactly where somebody wanted the search to begin. Richard Hawthorne stood motionless as fresh muddy footprints disappeared into the dense forest. Samuel Brooks lowered the flashlight toward the ground. Every footprint looked recent. Every step looked deliberate. Somebody had entered the abandoned greenhouse only minutes earlier. Richard Hawthorne took a deep breath. Somebody knows Ethan. Samuel Brooks nodded. Somebody wanted Richard Hawthorne to find a cassette tape. The two men followed the trail through thick trees. Cold wind pushed broken branches across the narrow path. Silence covered the forest. Almost 30 minutes later, the footprints suddenly stopped beside an old wooden bridge. No footprints continued beyond the bridge. No footprints returned. Samuel Brooks slowly looked around. Somebody planned every step. Richard Hawthorne noticed a small object tied beneath the bridge with fishing wire. Richard Hawthorne carefully untied the package. Inside waited an old silver pocket watch. Richard Hawthorne instantly recognized the watch. 20 years earlier, Richard Hawthorne had given the pocket watch to Ethan on Ethan's first birthday as a family keepsake. The back carried one engraved sentence. Forever my son. Richard Hawthorne's hands began shaking. No stranger could own this. Samuel Brooks examined the watch carefully. Fresh scratches covered the metal. The watch had not remained hidden for 20 years. Somebody had used the watch recently. A folded piece of paper slipped from inside the cover. Only 6 words appeared. The truth survives inside Ash Valley. Samuel Brooks unfolded a faded county map. Ash Valley appeared almost 80 miles away. Neither man wasted another second. 3 hours later, a forgotten mountain town welcomed very few visitors. Old wooden buildings lined empty streets. Every face carried curiosity. Richard Hawthorne entered the only diner in town. An elderly waitress quietly served coffee. Samuel Brooks placed Ethan's childhood photograph on the table. Has anybody seen this child? The waitress stared at the picture for several seconds. Fear slowly replaced curiosity. Without speaking, the waitress pointed toward a nearby hill. There used to be an orphanage. Richard Hawthorne immediately stood. The orphanage overlooked the valley from the highest point. Broken windows reflected gray clouds. Nature slowly swallowed the building. The front gate hung open. Samuel Brooks pushed a heavy wooden door. Dust filled every hallway. Children's toys remained scattered across the floor. Richard Hawthorne felt something strange. The building looked abandoned. Yet, somebody had cleaned several footprints from the entrance. Fresh tire marks appeared outside. Samuel Brooks whispered, "Somebody still visits." The search continued room by room. Every bedroom remained empty. Every office contained rotten paperwork. Then Richard Hawthorne entered the basement. A single metal cabinet stood untouched. The lock looked new. Samuel Brooks forced the cabinet open. Hundreds of orphan records filled the shelves. Most names belonged to children adopted years earlier. One folder immediately caught Samuel Brooks' attention. No name appeared, only one word: Project Phoenix. Richard Hawthorne opened the file. Most pages had been burned. Only fragments survived. One page listed children's ages. Another page listed new identities. One final document contained a sentence written in red ink. Subject number 7 transferred successfully. Attached beside the sentence rested an old photograph. 7 children stood together. Every child wore identical clothing. One boy stood slightly apart from the group. Blue eyes, dark hair, small birthmark beneath the left ear. Richard Hawthorne almost dropped the photograph. Ethan, Samuel Brooks carefully turned the picture over. A handwritten date appeared. 15 years after Ethan disappeared. Richard Hawthorne could barely breathe. Ethan had survived. Someone had hidden Ethan for years. But why? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed upstairs. Both men rushed toward the sound. The front door slammed shut. Car tires screamed outside. Samuel Brooks ran outside just in time to see a black SUV racing down the mountain road. Richard Hawthorne noticed something lying where the SUV had stopped. A leather notebook. The notebook belonged to somebody inside the SUV. Samuel Brooks opened the first page. Every page contained surveillance notes. Richard Hawthorne's business meetings. Emily Hawthorne's daily routine. Samuel Brooks' investigation. Every movement had been watched. The final page contained today's date. Below today's date appeared only one sentence. Richard Hawthorne reached Ash Valley exactly as planned. Richard Hawthorne looked towards Samuel Brooks. Somebody wanted Richard Hawthorne here. Samuel Brooks slowly nodded. But somebody also wanted the notebook discovered. Hidden inside the final page waited another photograph. The picture looked brand new. A young man around 20 years old repaired bicycles outside a tiny repair shop. The young man smiled naturally. The birthmark beneath the left ear remained unmistakable. Richard Hawthorne froze. Ethan, Samuel Brooks studied the background. A street sign appeared behind the bicycle shop. The sign read, Riverside Village. Neither man noticed another smaller detail. Standing across the street, partially hidden behind a newspaper, an unknown woman quietly watched the young man. The mysterious woman circled Ethan's photograph with a red pen. Then the mysterious woman whispered one chilling sentence. Richard Hawthorne must never meet Ethan. The mysterious woman closed a notebook. A black phone rang. The mysterious woman answered immediately. Yes, the mysterious woman said calmly. Richard Hawthorne followed every clue exactly as expected. The mysterious woman smiled. The final stage begins tonight. The black SUV disappeared into the darkness. Richard Hawthorne kept staring at Ethan's photograph. 20 years of grief suddenly turned into hope. Samuel Brooks folded the photograph and placed the picture inside a secure evidence envelope. Nobody else can know about Ethan until every answer comes out, Samuel Brooks said. Richard Hawthorne agreed. If the wrong person discovered Ethan first, 20 years of searching could end in tragedy. Before sunrise, Richard Hawthorne and Samuel Brooks arrived in Riverside Village. The quiet town looked ordinary. Children walked to school. Shop owners opened small businesses. Neighbors greeted each other by name. Nothing suggested that America's most famous missing child might have lived there. Samuel Brooks pointed toward the bicycle repair shop. From the photograph, the sign still hung above the entrance. The doors remained closed. Richard Hawthorne waited inside a parked car across the street. Every passing minute felt longer than the last 20 years. At exactly 8 a.m., the shop door opened. A young man stepped outside, carrying a toolbox. Dark hair, blue eyes, the same birthmark beneath the left ear. Richard Hawthorne felt tears fill Richard Hawthorne's eyes. Every childhood photograph suddenly came alive. Ethan, Richard Hawthorne whispered. Samuel Brooks placed a hand on Richard Hawthorne's shoulder. Richard Hawthorne cannot rush. The young man smiled at customers, repaired bicycles, and laughed with local children. Nothing about the young man suggested wealth. Nothing suggested the Hawthorne family. The young man lived like an ordinary citizen. Samuel Brooks quietly entered a nearby grocery store. The elderly cashier recognized the photograph immediately. Everybody knows Daniel Carter, the cashier said. Richard Hawthorne looked confused. Daniel Carter? The cashier smiled. Daniel Carter fixes bicycles for half the town. Daniel Carter never refuses anybody who needs help. Richard Hawthorne's heart sank. Someone had given Ethan a completely new identity. Later that afternoon, Samuel Brooks discovered public records. Daniel Carter had no birth certificate before age 4, no hospital records, no adoption papers, no official family history. Every document before childhood had disappeared. Samuel Brooks looked directly at Richard Hawthorne. Daniel Carter never officially existed before arriving here. Richard Hawthorne understood immediately. Someone had built an entirely fake life. Across town, Daniel Carter closed a bicycle shop and walked toward a small farmhouse. An elderly woman waited on the porch. Mary Carter smiled warmly. "Long day?" Daniel Carter nodded. "Busy day." Richard Hawthorne secretly watched from a distance. Daniel Carter hugged Mary Carter with genuine love. Richard Hawthorne suddenly stopped walking. Richard Hawthorne realized something painful. Daniel Carter believed Mary Carter was family. Interrupting that life without proof could destroy everything. Samuel Brooks quietly photographed the farmhouse. A delivery truck suddenly stopped beside the house. A tall man stepped out carrying several boxes. Daniel Carter greeted the visitor politely. The visitor looked toward Richard Hawthorne for only 1 second. The visitor's expression changed immediately. Recognition. Fear. The visitor quickly returned to the truck and drove away without delivering anything. Samuel Brooks memorized the license plate. That evening, Samuel Brooks traced the truck registration. The vehicle belonged to a private security company. The security company no longer existed. Records showed the company had closed 19 years earlier. One name appeared on the original ownership papers: Victor Kane. Samuel Brooks immediately recognized the name. Victor Kane had once served as head of security at Hawthorne Mansion. Victor Kane had resigned only 3 days after Ethan disappeared. Nobody had questioned the resignation. Nobody had searched for Victor Kane again. Richard Hawthorne looked stunned. Victor Kane protected Ethan. Samuel Brooks slowly nodded. Or Victor Kane kidnapped Ethan. Night fell over Riverside Village. Richard Hawthorne decided to meet Daniel Carter. Samuel Brooks disagreed. "Not yet." Before either man could continue, 3 black vehicles surrounded the street. Masked men jumped out. One man shouted, "Take the photograph." Another shouted, "Leave no witnesses." Gunshots echoed through the empty road. Richard Hawthorne and Samuel Brooks ran for cover. The attackers searched the parked car. One masked man found Ethan's photograph. Before the attacker could escape, Daniel Carter heard the commotion. Daniel Carter ran toward the street without hesitation. Daniel Carter tackled the attacker and grabbed the photograph. For the first time in 20 years, Daniel Carter looked directly at the childhood picture. Daniel Carter's face suddenly turned pale. A strange headache struck. Broken memories flashed inside Daniel Carter's mind. A large mansion, a smiling woman, a silver pocket watch, someone calling the name Ethan. Daniel Carter dropped to both knees. Daniel Carter whispered one question: "Who is Ethan?" The masked attackers realized Daniel Carter had seen the photograph. The leader raised a weapon toward Daniel Carter. Richard Hawthorne saw the danger. Without thinking, Richard Hawthorne ran into the open street. "No!" A single gunshot echoed across Riverside Village. The bullet struck Richard Hawthorne in the shoulder. Samuel Brooks returned fire. The attackers retreated into the darkness. Police sirens approached from every direction. Daniel Carter looked at the injured billionaire lying on the road. Richard Hawthorne looked back with tears. Neither man understood the invisible connection, but both men felt it. As the ambulance doors closed, Samuel Brooks looked at the blood-stained photograph. One sentence had become impossible to ignore. Daniel Carter was almost certainly Ethan Hawthorne. The only question remaining was even more terrifying. If Daniel Carter was Ethan, who had spent 20 years making sure Ethan never remembered the truth, the ambulance disappeared into the night. Daniel Carter remained frozen in the middle of the street. The childhood photograph still rested in Daniel Carter's hands. Blue eyes, dark hair, a small birthmark beneath the left ear. Every detail matched. Daniel Carter whispered the unfamiliar name again. Ethan. The name felt strangely familiar. Broken memories flashed through Daniel Carter's mind. A large white mansion. A woman singing a lullaby. A silver pocket watch. Then, everything disappeared. Richard Hawthorne regained consciousness inside a private hospital. The bullet had missed every vital organ. Samuel Brooks stood beside the hospital bed. "Daniel Carter is safe," Samuel Brooks said. Richard Hawthorne closed tired eyes in relief. Before another word could be spoken, a nurse delivered a sealed envelope. No sender. No fingerprints. Only one sentence appeared on the front: "Stop searching or Daniel Carter dies." Samuel Brooks immediately called the police. The envelope contained a flash drive. Inside the drive waited one video. The recording showed a younger Victor Kane speaking to an unknown woman 20 years earlier. Victor Kane looked terrified. If Richard Hawthorne discovers the truth, Project Phoenix collapses. The recording suddenly ended. Richard Hawthorne looked at Samuel Brooks. Project Phoenix was never finished. Samuel Brooks nodded. Somebody continued everything after Victor Kane disappeared. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter could not sleep. The photograph refused to leave Daniel Carter's thoughts. Mary Carter noticed the growing fear. Daniel, something happened. Daniel Carter slowly placed the photograph on the table. Mary, who am I? Silence filled the room. Mary Carter's hands began shaking. Tears slowly rolled down Mary Carter's face. For 20 years, Mary Carter had feared this question. Mary Carter opened an old wooden chest hidden beneath the bed. Inside rested newspaper articles, missing child headlines, a tiny blue sweater, the same silver pocket watch. Daniel Carter stared in disbelief. Mary Carter finally spoke. Daniel, 20 years ago, Victor Kane arrived during a terrible storm. Mary Carter continued through tears. Victor Kane carried a frightened little boy. Victor Kane begged for one promise. Raise the little boy with love. Never tell the little boy about the past until the danger disappears. Daniel Carter struggled to breathe. So, Daniel Carter is not your real son? Mary Carter gently shook Mary Carter's head. No. Mary Carter loved Daniel Carter exactly like a son. Daniel Carter hugged Mary Carter tightly. Neither wanted the moment to end. Samuel Brooks secretly returned to the abandoned orphanage. The basement still contained burn files. One loose brick caught Samuel Brooks' attention. Behind the wall rested a hidden metal box. Inside waited dozens of photographs. Every photograph showed children living under new identities. Each picture carried the same stamp, Project Phoenix. One final document remained untouched. Samuel Brooks unfolded the paper. A complete list of names appeared. The final signature shocked Samuel Brooks. Not Victor Kane. Not any criminal. The signature belonged to Emily Hawthorne. Samuel Brooks froze. Ethan's own mother had signed Project Phoenix documents 20 years earlier. Samuel Brooks immediately drove toward the hospital. Richard Hawthorne read every page in stunned silence. Richard Hawthorne refused to believe the evidence. Emily Hawthorne had spent 20 years crying before cameras. Emily Hawthorne had spent 20 years helping every public search. Why would Emily Hawthorne secretly approve Project Phoenix? Before Richard Hawthorne could process another thought, hospital television screens suddenly switched to breaking news. A reporter stood outside Riverside Village. Police had confirmed that Daniel Carter disappeared only hours ago. Richard Hawthorne's heart stopped. Security cameras showed black SUVs surrounding the farmhouse. Masked kidnappers forced Daniel Carter into one of the vehicles. Mary Carter tried to stop the kidnapping. Mary Carter suffered serious injuries. The vehicles vanished before police arrived. Richard Hawthorne immediately stood despite the shoulder injury. Samuel Brooks looked at the final page inside the hidden file. One handwritten address appeared beneath Emily Hawthorne's signature. An isolated research facility hidden deep in Blackstone Mountains. Samuel Brooks looked directly at Richard Hawthorne. Every answer waits there. Richard Hawthorne picked up the car keys. For 20 years, Richard Hawthorne searched for Ethan. Tonight, Richard Hawthorne brings Ethan home. Neither Richard Hawthorne nor Samuel Brooks realized one terrifying truth. Inside the mountain facility, Daniel Carter had already awakened. The mysterious woman stood beside the bed. The mysterious woman smiled calmly. Welcome home. Then the mysterious woman revealed the sentence that changed everything. Daniel Carter was never kidnapped. Project Phoenix was always meant to bring Ethan Hawthorne back. Daniel Carter slowly opened tired eyes. Bright lights covered the ceiling of the underground facility. Cold concrete walls surrounded the room. The mysterious woman calmly stood beside the bed. My name is Dr. Victoria Hayes. Dr. Victoria Hayes said, 20 years ago, Dr. Victoria Hayes made one impossible decision. Daniel Carter remained silent. Richard Hawthorne's silver pocket watch rested on a nearby table. Every answer seemed only moments away. Dr. Victoria Hayes placed an old leather file in front of Daniel Carter. Inside weighted dozens of photographs. Baby Ethan Hawthorne, Richard Hawthorne, Emily Hawthorne, Victor Kane, Project Phoenix. Daniel Carter's breathing became heavier with every page. "You deserve the truth," Dr. Victoria Hayes said. 20 years earlier, Victor Kane rushed into Dr. Victoria Hayes' office, carrying a frightened little boy. Victor Kane looked desperate. Richard Hawthorne's business enemies discovered Ethan's identity. A powerful criminal network planned to kidnap Ethan and force Richard Hawthorne to surrender Hawthorne Technologies. Victor Kane had only minutes to act. Emily Hawthorne approved one heartbreaking decision: Project Phoenix. The plan looked simple. Erase Ethan Hawthorne's public identity. Create Daniel Carter. Hide Ethan where nobody would ever search. Only 5 people knew the complete plan: Emily Hawthorne, Victor Kane, Dr. Victoria Hayes, Mary Carter, Samuel Brooks. Dr. Victoria Hayes looked into Daniel Carter's eyes. The memory treatment protected Daniel Carter from anyone trying to force information from Ethan. Daniel Carter slowly remembered fragments of childhood. A lullaby. Emily Hawthorne's smile. Richard Hawthorne lifting Ethan into the air. Everything slowly returned. Tears filled Daniel Carter's eyes. "I remember." Meanwhile, Richard Hawthorne and Samuel Brooks reached the mountain facility. Armed guards blocked the entrance. Richard Hawthorne walked forward without fear. "I came for Ethan." The guards hesitated. Suddenly, police helicopters appeared above the mountains. Samuel Brooks had secretly contacted federal authorities after discovering every Project Phoenix file. The facility surrendered without resistance. No gunfight happened. No innocent lives were lost. Richard Hawthorne rushed inside. One long hallway separated father and son. Daniel Carter slowly walked from the opposite side. Neither man spoke. 20 years of loss disappeared in one silent moment. Richard Hawthorne embraced Daniel Carter. Daniel Carter finally whispered, "Dad." Richard Hawthorne broke into tears. For the first time in 20 years, the Hawthorne family stood together again. Only one mystery remained. Richard Hawthorne turned toward Emily Hawthorne. Why hide the truth from Richard Hawthorne? Emily Hawthorne struggled to answer. 20 years of guilt finally poured out. The criminal organization promised Ethan would die if anybody learned Project Phoenix existed. Emily Hawthorne accepted 20 years of heartbreak to keep Ethan alive. Richard Hawthorne finally understood. Emily Hawthorne had never abandoned Ethan. Emily Hawthorne had sacrificed everything: the marriage, the family, personal happiness, even public trust, all to protect one child. Richard Hawthorne quietly took Emily Hawthorne's hand. No more secrets. Emily Hawthorne nodded through tears. No more secrets. Months later, the entire country learned the truth. Project Phoenix had never been a kidnapping conspiracy. Project Phoenix had been an extreme witness protection operation created to save one child's life from a ruthless criminal network. The criminal organization responsible for threatening Ethan was dismantled after the investigation uncovered decades of hidden crimes. Victor Kane's name was finally cleared. Mary Carter received national recognition for raising Ethan with unconditional love. Daniel Carter visited Mary Carter every weekend. "Mary Carter will always be family," Daniel Carter said. Mary Carter smiled proudly. "A mother's love never depends on blood." Richard Hawthorne agreed. Emily Hawthorne finally found peace after carrying 20 years of unbearable guilt. 1 year later, Daniel Hawthorne reopened the old bicycle shop. Not because money was necessary, because Riverside Village had become home. Children still gathered outside every afternoon. Daniel repaired bicycles without charging families who could not afford the cost. A small photograph stood near the cash register. Richard Hawthorne, Emily Hawthorne, Mary Carter, Samuel Brooks, Daniel Hawthorne. One family, built by love instead of circumstance. Samuel Brooks quietly smiled while watching the family from across the street. "Justice sometimes arrives late," Samuel Brooks said, "but real love always finds a way home." Daniel Hawthorne looked toward the sunset. 20 stolen years could never return. A lifetime of new memories still waited ahead. For Daniel Hawthorne, the greatest inheritance had never been billions of dollars. The greatest inheritance was discovering that love had protected Ethan Hawthorne long before wealth ever could.